The Indian Bird. A merchant kept a bird in a cage. He was going to India, the land from which the bird came, and asked it whether he could bring anything back for it. The bird asked for its freedom, but was refused. So he asked the merchant to visit a jungle in India and announce his captivity to the free birds who were there. The merchant did so, and no sooner had he spoken when a wild bird, just like his own, fell senseless out of a tree onto the ground. The merchant thought that this must be a relative of his own bird, and felt sad that he should have caused this death. When he got home, the bird asked him whether he had brought good news from India. "No," said the merchant, "I fear that my news is bad. One of your relations collapsed and fell at my feet when I mentioned your captivity." As soon as these words were spoken, the merchant's bird collapsed and fell to the bottom of the cage. "The news of his kinsman's death has killed him too," thought the merchant. Sorrowfully he picked up the bird and put it on the window sill. At once the bird revived and flew to a nearby tree. "Now you know," the bird said, "that what you thought was disaster was in fact good news for me, and how the message, the suggestion of how to behave in order to free myself, was transmitted to me through you, my captor." And he flew away, free at last. Rumi's fable is one of many which stress for the Sufi seeker the great importance played in Sufism by indirect learning. Imitators and systems styled to accord with conventional thinking in East and West alike generally prefer to emphasize system and program, rather than the totality of experience which takes place in a Sufi school. When death came to Baghdad. The disciple of a Sufi of Baghdad was sitting in the corner of an inn one day when he heard two figures talking. From what they said, he realized that one of them was the angel of death. "I have several calls to make in this city during the next 3 weeks," the angel was saying to his companion. Terrified, the disciple concealed himself until the two had left. Then, applying his intelligence to the problem of how to cheat a possible call from death, he decided that if he kept away from Baghdad, he should not be touched. From this reasoning, it was but a short step to hiring the fastest horse available and spurring it night and day towards the distant town of Samarkand. Meanwhile, Death met the Sufi teacher, and they talked about various people. "And where is your disciple so-and-so?" asked Death. "He should be somewhere in this city, spending his time in contemplation, perhaps in a caravanserai," said the teacher. "Surprising," said the angel, "because he is on my list. Yes, here it is. I have to collect him in 4 weeks' time, at Samarkand of all places." This treatment of the story of death is taken from Hikayat-i-Naqshiyya, tales formed according to a design. The author of this story, which is a very favorite folklore story in the Middle East, was the great Sufi Fudail ibn Iyad, a former highwayman who died in the early part of the 9th century. According to Sufi tradition, confirmed by historical material, Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph of Baghdad, tried to concentrate all knowledge at his court. Various Sufis lived under his patronage, but none allowed this all-powerful monarch to enlist him in his service. Sufi historians relate how Harun and his vizier visited Mecca to see Fudail, who said, "Commander of the faithful, I fear that your comely face may fall into hellfire." Harun asked the sage, "Have you ever known anyone with greater detachment than you have?" Fudail said, "Yes, you have greater detachment than I. I can detach from the environment of the customary world, but you have detached yourself from something much greater, from that which is everlasting." Fudayl told the Caliph that power over oneself was better than 1,000 years of power over others. The Grammarian and the Dervish. One dark night, a dervish was passing a dry well, when he heard a cry for help from below. "What is the matter?" he called down. "I am a grammarian, and I have unfortunately fallen, due to my ignorance of the path, into this deep well, in which I am now all but immobilized," responded the other. "Hold, friend, I'll fetch a ladder and a rope," said the dervish. "One moment, please," said the grammarian. "Your grammar and diction are faulty. Be good enough to amend them." "If that is so much more important than the essentials," shouted the dervish, "you had best stay where you are until I have learnt to speak properly." And he went his way. This tale was related by Jalaluddin Rumi and is recorded in Aflaki's Acts of the Adepts. Published in England in 1965 under the title of Legends of the Sufis, this account of the Mevlevis and their supposed doings was written in the 14th century. Some of the stories are mere wonder tales, but others are historical, and some are of the strange type known by the Sufis as illustrative history. That is to say, a series of events are concocted to point a meaning connected with psychological processes. For this reason, such tales have been called the artistry of the dervish scientists. The Dervish and the Princess. A king's daughter was as fair as the moon, and admired by all. A dervish saw her one day, as he was about to eat a piece of bread. The morsel fell to the ground, for he was so deeply moved that he could not hold it. As she passed by, she smiled upon him. This action sent him into convulsions, his bread in the dust, his senses half bereft. In a state of ecstasy he remained thus for 7 years. The dervish spent all that time in the street, where dogs slept. He was a nuisance to the princess, and her attendants decided to kill him. But she called him to her and said, "There can be no union between you and me, and my slaves intend to kill you, therefore disappear." The miserable man answered, "Since I first saw you, life is nothing to me. They will kill me without cause. But please answer me one question, since you are to be the cause of my death. Why did you smile at all?" "Foolish man," said the princess, "when I saw what a fool you were making of yourself, I smiled in pity, not for any other reason." And she disappeared from his sight. In his Parliament of the Birds, Attar speaks of the misunderstanding of subjective emotions which causes men to believe that certain experiences, the smile of the princess, are special gifts, admiration, whereas they may be the very reverse, pity. Many have been misled, because this kind of literature has its own conventions, into believing that Sufi classical writings are other than technical descriptions of psychological states. The increasing of necessity. The tyrannical ruler of Turkestan was listening to the tales of a dervish one evening, when he bethought himself of asking about Hida. "Hida," said the dervish, "comes in response to need. Seize his coat when he appears, and all knowledge is yours." "Can this happen to anyone?" asked the king. "Anyone capable," said the dervish. "Who more capable than I?" thought the king, and he published a proclamation. "He who presents to me the invisible Hida, the great protector of men, him shall I enrich." A poor old man by the name of Bakhtiyar Baba hearing this cried by the heralds, formed an idea. He said to his wife, "I have a plan. We shall soon be rich, but a little later I shall have to die. But this does not matter, for our riches will leave you well provided for." Then Bakhtiar went before the king and told him that he would find Hida within 40 days, if the king would give him 1,000 pieces of gold. "If you find Hida," said the king, "you shall have 10 times this 1,000 pieces of gold. If you do not, you will die, executed at this very spot as a warning to those who trifle with kings." Bakhtiar accepted the conditions. He returned home and gave the money to his wife as a provision for the rest of her life. The rest of the 40 days he spent in contemplation, preparing himself for the other life. On the 40th day he went before the king. "Your Majesty," he said, "your greed caused you to think that money would produce Hida. But Hida, as it is related, does not appear in response to something given from a position of greed." The king was furious. "Wretch, you have forfeited your life. Who are you to trifle with the aspirations of a king?" Bakhtiar said, "Legend has it that any man may meet Hida, but the meeting will be fruitful only insofar as that man's intentions are correct. Hida, they say, would visit you to the extent and for the period that you are worth his while being visited. This is something over which neither you nor I have any control." "Enough of this wrangling," said the king, "for it will not prolong your life. It only remains to ask the ministers assembled here for their advice upon the best way to put you to death." He turned to the first wazir and said, "How shall this man die?" The first wazir said, "Roast him alive, as a warning." The second wazir, speaking in order of precedence, said, "Dismember him, limb from limb." The third wazir said, "Provide him with the necessities of life, instead of forcing him to cheat in order to provide for his family." While this discussion was going on, an ancient sage had walked into the assembly hall. As soon as the third wazir had spoken, he said, "Every man opines in accordance with his permanent hidden prejudices." "What do you mean?" asked the king. "I mean that the first wazir was originally a baker, so he speaks in terms of roasting. The second wazir used to be a butcher, so he talks about dismemberment. The third wazir, having made a study of statecraft, sees the origin of the matter we are discussing. Note 2 things. First, that Hida appears and serves each man in accordance with that man's ability to profit by his coming. Second, that this man Bakhtiar, whom I name Baba in token of his sacrifices, was driven by despair to do what he did. He increased his necessity, and accordingly he made me appear to you." As they watched, the ancient sage melted before their eyes. Trying to do what Hida directed, the king gave a permanent allowance to Bakhtiar. The first 2 wazirs were dismissed, and the 1,000 pieces of gold were returned to the royal treasury by the grateful Bakhtiar Baba and his wife. How the king was able to see Hida again, and what transpired between them, is in the story of the story of the story of the unseen world. Bakhtiar Baba is said to have been a Sufi sage who lived a humble and unremarkable life in Khorasan until the events described above. This tale, attributed to many other Sufi sheikhs, illustrates the concept of the entwining of human aspiration with another range of being. Hida is the link between these 2 spheres. The title is taken from Jalaluddin Rumi's famous poem, "New organs of perception come into being as a result of necessity. Therefore, O man, increase your necessity, so that you may increase your perception." This version comes from the lips of a Dervish master of Afghanistan. The man who looked only at the obvious. A seeker after truth, after many vicissitudes, at last found an enlightened man, endowed with perception of things not available to all. The seeker said to him, "Allow me to follow you, so that I may learn by observing what you have acquired." The wise one answered, "You will not be able to endure it, for you will not have the patience to stay in contact diligently with the pattern of events. You will try to act in obvious ways instead of learning." The seeker promised that he would try to exercise patience and learn from what happened, without acting in accordance with existing prejudice. "Then I make one condition," said the wise one, "and that is that you must ask nothing about any event until such time as I myself give you an answer." The seeker promised eagerly enough, and they set off on a journey. Scarcely had they boarded the boat which was to take them across a wide river, when the wise one secretly made a hole in the bottom, causing a leak, and seemingly repaying the ferryman's help with destructive action. The seeker could not contain himself. "People may be drowned. The boat will be sunk and lost. Is this the action of a good man?" "I told you, did I not," remarked the wise one mildly, "that you would not be able to avoid jumping to conclusions." "I had already forgotten the condition," said the seeker, and he asked to be forgiven for the slip, but he was very puzzled. Their journey continued until they came to a country where they were treated well, welcomed by the king, and asked to go hunting with him. The small son of the king was mounted in front of the wise one. As soon as he and the seeker were separated by a thicket from the rest of the hunt, the wise one said, "Quick, follow me as fast as you can." He twisted the ankle of the young prince, deposited the child in the thicket, and rode his horse as fast as he could beyond the boundaries of the kingdom. The seeker was overwhelmed with shock and the guilt of having been a party to this crime. Wringing his hands, he exclaimed, "A king befriended us, trusted us with his son and heir, and we dealt abominably with him. What kind of conduct is this, unworthy of the meanest of men?" The wise one simply turned to the seeker and said to him, "Friend, I am carrying on with what I have to do. You are an observer, and few people even reach this position of observer. Having reached it, it seems to me that you cannot make any use of it, for you are judging from your fixed position of prejudice. I again remind you of your promise." "I recognize that I would not be here but for my promise, and that promise is binding upon me," said the seeker. "Please, therefore, forgive me once again. I find the habit of working from assumptions hard to break. If I should question you but once again, dismiss me from your company." They journeyed on. Reaching a large and prosperous city, the travellers asked for a little food, but nobody would give them even a scrap. Charity was unknown here, and the sacred obligations of guesthood had been forgotten. On the contrary, wild dogs were set upon them. As they reached the outskirts of the city, hungry, faint, and thirsty, the seeker's companion said, "Stop a while here by this ruined wall, for we must repair it." For some hours they laboured, mixing mud, straw, and water, until the wall was restored. The seeker was so exhausted that his discipline deserted him, and he said, "We will not be paid for this. We have twice repaid good with evil. Now we repay evil with good. I am at the end of my tether, and cannot go further." "Have no more fear," said the wise one, "and remember that you said that if you questioned me just once more, I should dismiss you. Our ways part here, for I have much to do." Before I leave you, I will explain the meaning of some of my actions, so that perhaps one day you will again be able to go on a journey such as this. The boat I damaged sank, and was thus spared confiscation by a tyrant who was seizing all boats for a war. The boy whose ankle I twisted cannot now grow up to be a usurper, or even inherit the kingdom, because the law says that only the physically complete may lead the nation. In this city of hatred are 2 young orphans. When they grow up, the wall will again crumble and reveal the hoard concealed within it, which is their patrimony. They will be strong enough to take possession of it and reform the whole city, for this is their destiny. Go now in peace. You are dismissed. This tale was told and retold in the Middle Ages as a Christian story by the monks who used the Gesta Romanorum as their source of uplifting applications. It is also said to be the original of Parnell's Hermit. Pope said that its original was Spanish, and although it has been suspected of being an Oriental tale, for long nobody in the West seems to have connected it with the Sufis, or to have noted that its first appearance was in the Quran, chapter 18, the cave. It is related in the above form by Jan Fishan Khan.